Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack a truly fascinating narrative all about sudden reversals, karma, and the deepest parts of human nature. Today, we're looking at a classic folk tale straight out of the village of Bhagalpur. It centers around a guy named Ranjit, whose life takes a wild, almost unbelievable turn. And it's one of those stories that just forces you to ask profound questions about what sudden wealth actually does to a person's core character.
So, picture this. How exactly does a deeply humiliated beggar suddenly become the wealthiest person in his entire village? I mean, it's the ultimate underdog scenario, right? But the actual path Ranjit takes to get there, and more importantly, what he decides to do once he reaches the absolute top, is entirely unexpected. To really wrap our heads around this incredible reversal of fortune, we've got to start at the very beginning, back when Ranjit literally had absolutely nothing.
Act 1. The Burden of Debt.
So things in Bhagalpur are, well, they're pretty grim. A severe drought has completely wrecked the village, leaving our main guy, Ranjit, literally drowning in debt. And because he's uneducated and doesn't really have any other way to make a living, he's forced into some incredibly desperate survival tactics. On the flip side of this, we have the village landlord and his accountant, the Munshi. And let me tell you, these guys are greedy, they're aggressive, and they are entirely devoid of, let's just call it empathy. They're constantly threatening to seize the very last thing Ranjit even owns, which is his tiny, humble little hut. The power imbalance here is just absolute.
So what's Ranjit gonna do? He actually comes up with this secret plan. He quietly sneaks out of Bhagalpur, travels all the way to the city, puts on a beggar's disguise, and spends his days asking for alms. And you know what? It kind of works. He manages to save up enough cash to return and pay the cruel landlord a bit of interest, which temporarily saves his hut. The landlord is obviously shocked, but, happy to take the cash. But here's the tragic part. Ranjit's secret doesn't stay hidden for long. One day, the landlord's wife, Mangal, decides she wants to take a trip to the city to see the ocean. And while they're wandering around, the landlord spots Ranjit right there in his beggar's clothing. His secret is completely blown.
And man, the confrontation is absolutely brutal. The landlord doesn't just catch him, he completely degrades him in public. He sneers at him, yelling, "You act like a hero in the village, but come here to beg." He's laughing at Ranjit, throwing petty change at his feet, and basically turning a man's desperate bid to survive into a total joke. The emotional weight of this moment is just devastating. Utterly exhausted from the constant taunts, the sheer public humiliation finally breaks Ranjit. It drives him to completely abandon his home in Bhagalpur in total despair.
Act 2. A Fortune Multiplied.
Now, what's really interesting about this is where the story shifts into the supernatural. Ranjit is at rock bottom. He feels entirely alone, completely ruined, and he actually decides to end his own life. But literally right in the nick of time, an ascetic monk, a mystical sadhu, intervenes. The monk takes magical water from his kamandal, a traditional water pot, and sprinkles it right over Ranjit. Instantly, Ranjit is transformed back into his beggar's clothing. But the monk doesn't just save his life. He initiates this really strange and powerful magic. The monk gives him this incredibly specific blessing. Get this, from that moment on, any alms Ranjit receives while wearing that exact beggar's disguise will magically quadruple. Yep, a massive 4 times multiplier. That is the kind of guaranteed return on investment that literal hedge funds can only dream of, right? And just to prove it, the monk hands Ranjit a single gold coin. Bam! Instantly, it becomes 4. The monk tells him this is a super rare blessing, a gift of grace for all the intense suffering he's been through. Let's move to and see how this builds. Because armed with this magical multiplier, Ranjit's wealth just absolutely skyrockets over a few short weeks. He takes those gold coins, heads straight into the city, and sells them to a jeweler for an absolute fortune. But he doesn't just sit on a pile of cash. No, he's incredibly motivated by the memory of his humiliation. He immediately hires a contractor, buys a huge plot of land right on the outskirts of his old village, Bhagalpur, and commissions the construction of an unbelievably grand mansion. His master plan to show the very people who mocked him exactly what he's capable of.
Act 3. The Beggar's Grand Feast.
Okay, so the mansion is finished, and it is a total marvel. Ranjit decides it's time to host a massive grand feast. But here's where he plays it so smart. He sends out this sweeping invitation to every single resident of Bhagalpur, but he keeps it completely anonymous. Nobody knows who owns the house. Naturally, the greedy villagers, especially the landlord and his accountant, hear about this mysterious new millionaire and excitedly accept the invite. They're all hoping to rub elbows, curry some favor, and maybe gain a financial advantage for themselves. As everyone arrives at the feast, the dramatic irony is just off the charts.
Ranjit is standing right at the front gates, but he is deliberately wearing his old, tattered beggar's clothes. The arrogant landlord struts up, sees him, and immediately starts mocking him all over again. He just assumes Ranjit is there to scrounge for leftover food. Dripping with arrogance, the landlord sneers, "You came here too. You haven't even settled a home and you're already begging?" I mean, wow, the guy hasn't learned a single thing.
But this time, it's a trap, and it springs perfectly. Right while the landlord is laughing in his face, the head contractor steps forward. He loudly intervenes, looks at the landlord in total disbelief, and announces to the entire crowd that the man standing there in the beggar's clothes, Ranjit, is actually the sole owner of the mansion. The ultimate power shift happens right there on the front steps. The landlord, the accountant, and all those judgmental villagers are left completely stunned, just staring open-mouthed at the beggar they drove out of town.
So the crucial point is what Ranjit does with this moment of victory. He looks right at the landlord and delivers an absolute mic drop. He says, "Having nothing, I now have everything." He points out the blazing hypocrisy of the villagers. Sure, they have all their material comforts, but they are poor in spirit, constantly begging for more through their own sheer greed. Ranjit, who is stripped of literally everything, has acquired true wealth, both materially and morally. The villagers are just deeply, deeply ashamed and immediately start begging for his forgiveness.
Conclusion, wealth, character, and destiny.
Now, you might think the story ends with him living large in his new mansion, maybe looking down on the villagers from his balcony. But it doesn't. Despite possessing immense wealth and finally earning the respect, or at least the fear, of his abusers, Ranjit makes a fascinating choice. He chooses to keep returning to the city to live his life begging. And this brilliantly illustrates how he doesn't let the mansion or the money change his daily reality or inflate his ego. He finds a unique sense of purpose, staying grounded in the very humble origins that brought him his magic fortune in the first place.
Ranjit literally had the money to be anything, right? To live like an absolute king among the very people who shamed him. Yet, he chose to keep begging. It asks the ultimate question: does true character remain unchanged by fortune? Does having it all mean you suddenly have to change who you fundamentally are? It's a really powerful reminder that our identity isn't dictated by the clothes we wear or the size of our house, but by the quiet choices we make every single day. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that thought. Catch you next time.